Ever wondered how some of the most notorious medieval queens became legendary? Well, tonight we're diving deep into the chaotic lives and scandalous stories of women who ruled with power, passion, and a whole lot of drama. These queens didn't just shape history, they made headlines long before tabloids existed. But before we jump into the juicy details, do me a quick favor. If you genuinely enjoy the stories I bring, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And hey, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment with your location and the time. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, let's dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Trust me, this ride is going to be filled with betrayal, intrigue, and more than a few jaw-dropping moments. So, sit back, relax, and let's uncover the royal secrets that history tried to bury. Joanna of Naples wasn't just a queen, she was a walking headline. Crowned in 1343, she didn't just follow royal protocol, she tore it up and made her own rules. Where most saw tradition, Joanna saw opportunity, and where others saw marriage, she saw a chance to collect husbands, multiple ones in fact. She married 4 times, which might sound scandalous, but in noble circles it wasn't entirely unusual. What raised a few eyebrows, though, was how quickly her husbands tended to meet untimely ends. First up, she married Andrew of Hungary, but their honeymoon phase didn't last. In fact, he didn't even make it through year 1. Found hanging from a window, it was officially declared an unfortunate accident. But unofficially? Well, let's just say people had questions. As for Joanna, she didn't bat an eye. She moved on without hesitation, almost like she had a habit of outliving her husbands. Now, there's a legend that adds some extra spin. See to Joanna's already spicy reputation. It's said that she had a trapdoor built right beneath her bed, a bit of a dramatic solution to ending a date when things weren't going her way. After a night of royal intimacy, the story goes that the floor would open up, sending her unsuspecting partner tumbling straight into the castle moat below. Efficient? Absolutely. Theatrical? You bet. Possible? Well, let's just say it might have been a bit too creative for reality. Maybe it was just a bitter ex telling tall tales. But hey, it stuck. And honestly, it fits her vibe perfectly. Joanna ruled Naples with a sense of elegance, but there was always a certain flair to everything she did, a mix of power, charm, and danger. Some called her charming, others called her dangerous. A few called her both, backing away slowly, as if they weren't quite sure which version of Joanna they were dealing with. Through wars, papal outrage, political rivals, and more bedroom scandals than anyone could keep track of, Joanna held her own. She wore her crown like she wore her reputation, boldly and without apology. But, like all good legends, her story had a dark end. Strangled to death, possibly by one of her enemies or even an ally, it's hard to say. But by the time she passed, Joanna had already built a legacy filled with drama, power, and enough gossip to fuel Italian ballads for centuries. Joanna wasn't just a queen, she was a headline, long before headlines existed. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just live through the 12th century, she ran it. Queen of both France and England, she wasn't a passive ruler who simply played the Game of Thrones. No, Eleanor flipped the board, drank the wine, and then wrote a sonnet about it. If anyone was going to break the rules, it was her, and she made sure history remembered it. At the tender age of 15, Eleanor married Louis VII of France. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Except Louis was pious, socially awkward, and let's be real, about as exciting as a medieval tax form. The marriage barely worked. He dragged her on a second crusade to the Holy Land, which, let's be honest, sounds more like a military campaign than a romantic getaway. Eleanor, in contrast, was witty, wealthy, and had a knack for keeping her attention on far more interesting things, like the handsome Prince of Antioch, her uncle. The rumors? Oh, they swirled. Louis? He frowned. A lot. The marriage didn't last long, though, and after a cold supper in Damascus, it quietly came to an end. But Eleanor wasn't about to hang up her crown and call it quits. Oh no, she was just getting started. She practically sprinted back to Aquitaine and remarried, this time to Henry Plantagenet, who would become Henry II of England. He was 11 years younger, red-haired, and, as she would soon find out, wildly unpredictable. In short, her type. Together, they had 10 children, including Richard the Lionheart and John, the future King of England. But it wasn't just about birthing future monarchs for Eleanor. She was running a kingdom. She also hosted poetry contests, supported courtly love, and became the center of a cultural movement that encouraged knights to adore women from afar. Of course, no one followed the from afar part. It was more about stolen glances, secret meetings, and long walks that ended behind tapestries. But Eleanor's life wasn't all about poetry and art. It also had its darker moments. When Henry's wandering eye strayed and he started sleeping with other women, Eleanor wasn't having any of it. She didn't just quietly sulk, she staged a full rebellion. Yes, you heard that right. She helped her son, Richard the Lionheart, stage a rebellion against his own father. Henry? Not amused. Eleanor? Oh, she was amused, but it didn't end well for her. She was placed under house arrest for 16 years. But here's the kicker. For Eleanor, house arrest meant more time to sip wine, write letters, and plot vengeance through her children. You can bet Henry wasn't sleeping easy, knowing his wife had her eyes on the throne, even if she was technically imprisoned. Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't just a queen, she was a force of nature, rewriting the rules of what a medieval queen could be. Bold, intelligent, and willing to risk it all for power, love, and the occasional poetic rebellion, she set the stage for every woman who would come after her. She was a queen in more ways than one, ruling lands, hearts, and history. Margaret of Burgundy might not have been the type of queen who openly poisoned her court or staged bloody coups, but she sure knew how to create a scandal. On paper, she was the model medieval queen, royal bloodline, married to the heir of France, looked stunning in fur-trimmed gowns, and never caused an uproar, at least not openly. But as history has shown, sometimes it's the queens who seem the least likely to cause a fuss who end up making the most noise. Margaret's marriage to Louis X, the future king of France, wasn't exactly the stuff of legends. Louis, well, let's just say his charisma was often compared to boiled cabbage. The marriage wasn't thrilling, to say the least. Louis was about as exciting as a knight's armor in the dead of winter. But Margaret, like any royal, wasn't about to settle for dull. She started to get a little restless. You see, the real scandal came when she and her sister-in-law, Blanche, began meeting with a pair of handsome Norman knights in secret. Where, you ask? In a royal tower by the Seine, a place that was conveniently private, eerily quiet, and perfect for, well, less than courtly behavior. Sounds like the set of a medieval soap opera, right? And that's where the real drama began. You won't believe how they were caught. The knights were recognized by the pattern on their pillowcases. Yes, you read that right, pillowcases. It turns out the knights had luxury linens identical to those used in the princess's chambers. Seriously, they got caught because of bad laundry choices. Margaret's downfall? It all came crashing down over a set of linens. No poison, no espionage, just some very unfortunate housekeeping. King Philip IV, Margaret's father-in-law, was furious. The knights were tortured and executed in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. And as for Margaret? Well, she was thrown into a gloomy prison at Château Gaillard, a place that was as cheerful as its name suggests. 2 years later, she died, possibly from illness, suffocation, or the fact that her husband wanted a clean slate before becoming king. The details are murky, but what we do know is this. Margaret's scandal wasn't about politics, witchcraft, or even treason. It was simply about being a little too charming in the wrong tower, with the wrong men, on the wrong pillowcases. Margaret of Burgundy may not have been remembered for grand political moves or military victories, but her name lives on as the queen who brought down a royal house with nothing more than a bad case of pillow talk. And in medieval France, that was more than enough to seal your fate. Isabella of France had everything a medieval queen could ask for: royal blood, a crown, expensive French shoes, and a husband she couldn't stand. Married to Edward II of England in 1308, Isabella's fairy tale marriage quickly turned into a nightmare. Edward was tall, handsome, and, let's be honest, emotionally available. Just not to his wife. His heart, and apparently his attention, belonged entirely to his male favorites, one of whom was Piers Gaveston, a flamboyant knight with a fondness for jewels and bad political decisions. This situation was pretty much a royal disaster from the start. At their coronation banquet, Gaveston outshone Isabella, wearing more jewels than the queen herself. Naturally, Isabella noticed, and she wasn't thrilled. But instead of silently enduring her husband's blatant favoritism, Isabella did what any self-respecting medieval queen would do. She let her frustrations simmer until they boiled over. Edward had a knack for making things worse. After Gaveston was exiled for the second time by a group of angry nobles, he was eventually brought back. But when Gaveston's return triggered an even more intense rivalry with Isabella, the nobles grew tired of the whole situation. One day, in an act of ultimate disapproval, they executed Gaveston. The king, though upset, shed a single tear, or maybe not. It's hard to say. But as for Isabella, well, her expression was more like a "finally" than anything else. But Edward, being the eternal romantic, quickly replaced Gaveston with another lover, Hugh Despenser, a man whose greed and general unpleasantness made Gaveston seem like a picnic in comparison. Despenser wasn't just sleeping with Isabella's husband, he was taking over the kingdom. He exiled Isabella's allies, seized her lands, and publicly humiliated her. Isabella, like the queen of drama she was, didn't sit back and take it. Oh no, she had a plan. In 1326, Isabella decided she'd had enough. She took her son, the future Edward III, and left for France under the guise of diplomacy. Once there, she met up with Roger Mortimer, a rebellious nobleman who had a strong jawline and even stronger political ambitions. Together, they launched an invasion of England, and in the ultimate plot twist, Isabella deposed her husband. Edward II was captured, but his fate? Well, it's a bit of a mystery. Some say he died in prison under mysterious circumstances. One particularly graphic rumor suggests a red-hot poker was involved. Most historians think that's just a bit of over-exaggeration, but still. Isabella's hands weren't exactly clean in all of this. She ruled England as regent for several years, sharing power, and possibly a little more, with Mortimer until her son, Edward III, grew tired of watching them. One thing led to another, and Isabella was overthrown by her own son, eventually retiring to a comfortable life, no longer involved in the royal drama. Isabella's story went from being the neglected wife to the queen who invaded her own country, deposed her husband, and took control of England. She entered as a wife, she left as a legend, and while her reign may have ended in disgrace, her legacy lives on as the queen who took the throne, and then some. Agnes of Navarre wasn't the kind of queen you'd expect to see in a royal scandal, at least not at first glance. She ticked all the right boxes: royal blood, a politically savvy marriage to the grandson of King James II of Aragon, and a position that seemed perfect on paper. But don't let her picture-perfect life fool you. Agnes was about to show the world that being a model queen didn't mean being a boring one. Her marriage to James IV of Navarre might have seemed promising, but there was just one little problem. Her husband was halfway to madness, and not the quirky, artistic kind of madness. No, James was the kind that woke up screaming, accusing curtains of treason. Naturally, Agnes wasn't exactly thrilled with this arrangement. What do you do when your royal husband starts to lose his grip on reality? You turn to other options. And Agnes, well, she had plenty of options. You see, Agnes had a reputation for being charming, cultured, and, let's say, a bit adventurous when it came to her affections. Rumor has it she kept a rather colorful list of lovers, knights, courtiers, even a monk or two who might not have been keeping their vows as closely as they should. Of course, in a royal court, secrets are hard to keep, especially when you have a nosy staff. Before long, whispers began to swirl. Some even said that her lovers, well, they didn't always leave the palace in one piece. And then things took a darker turn. Some say rivals started mysteriously disappearing. A maid here, a courtier there, dead, gone without explanation. Were these deaths truly the result of bad luck or just unfortunate accidents? Or did Agnes have a hand in it? We'll never know for sure, but the rumors made their rounds. Even the kitchen staff started locking the spice cabinets when Agnes passed by, just in case. Still, Agnes never officially got caught. No public trial, no confession. She just kept living her life, attending court, ruling her kingdom, and letting the whispers swirl. Her husband, meanwhile, was none the wiser. He continued his reign of madness, blissfully unaware of his wife's extracurricular activities. When James IV finally died, shockingly not by her hand, though that would have made a great plot twist, Agnes decided to retire to a convent. Not out of guilt, mind you. No, it was just tradition. Noble women went to convents when their husbands died, and Agnes, it seems, was no different. She didn't remarry, probably because no one was brave enough to ask. But before you think Agnes had turned over a new leaf, remember this: she didn't go to the convent to repent. She went to outlive her scandals, write letters, and maybe, just maybe, plot a few more secrets in peace. Agnes of Navarre never had any heirs, but she left behind a legacy of rumors, whispers, and cautionary tales. Her life may have been quiet in the end, but her name still echoes through history. A reminder that behind every royal marriage, there's always a little bit of drama waiting to unfold. Joanna of Castile wasn't just a queen by title, she was a walking cautionary tale about the dangers of too much passion and not enough trust. Born a princess, crowned queen, and with a heart that loved fiercely, Joanna's story is one of devotion, betrayal, and a descent into obsession that would later be immortalized in history. Joanna's marriage to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy started off with all the passion of a royal love story. He was handsome, charming, and of course, ambitious. She fell hard, and it wasn't long before they became one of the most beloved royal couples in Europe. But the story soon took a darker turn. Philip, despite his good looks and charismatic smirk, had a habit of straying, no surprise there. His infidelities were numerous, and Joanna, being the passionate and deeply emotional woman she was, couldn't handle the betrayal. As the rumors of Philip's affairs began to swirl, Joanna's world started to unravel. She became increasingly obsessed with him, unable to let go of the man who had promised her everything, but, in return, gave her nothing but heartbreak. Then came the fateful day in 1506, when Philip suddenly dropped dead. The cause? Well, officially, it was said he died from drinking cold water after a game of ball, a ridiculously vague explanation that left plenty of room for suspicion. But here's where Joanna's story takes a bizarre twist. While most queens would have mourned their husbands with the customary grief, Joanna went a little extra. She didn't just wear a black veil and quietly move on. Oh no. Instead, she had her husband's body dug up repeatedly to check if anyone had stolen it. She would kiss his lifeless lips, insist on sleeping next to the coffin, and, according to some rumors, possibly even with the body. Yes, you heard that right. She carried her husband's corpse around with her for months, refusing to part with it and treating it as if it were still alive. Was this grief? Or was this something darker? Historians have debated whether Joanna was truly mad or just devastated by a man who had let her down in life and death. Whatever the case, her actions soon became so erratic that her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, had no choice but to declare her insane and lock her away in a convent for the next 46 years. In the end, Joanna of Castile was a queen who lived for love, and tragically, she died from it. She may not have ruled for long or left a legacy of political greatness, but her obsession with Philip became the stuff of legend. History remembers her not for her reign or her kingdom, but for her passionate devotion that led her to madness. Joanna wasn't just a queen, she was a walking lesson in the dangers of losing yourself in love. And while her reign ended in isolation, her name lives on as one of the most haunting figures in royal history. Catherine the Great is one of those figures whose reputation precedes her. Except in her case, much of it is completely made up. The woman who ruled Russia with an iron fist, reformed the empire, and transformed her nation into a superpower has been the subject of countless rumors. But none was more infamous than the absurd tale about her supposed death involving a horse. Let's set the record straight. Catherine the Great did not die attempting intimate relations with a horse, but the fact that this rumor even spread tells you a lot about how people couldn't handle a woman in power. Born a minor German princess, Catherine married the future Tsar Peter III of Russia. Peter, as it turns out, wasn't exactly husband material. He was childish, obsessed with military toys, and more interested in playing with Prussian soldiers than running a vast empire. Catherine, on the other hand, was intelligent, ambitious, and not the type to let a bad marriage stand in the way of her goals. When Peter's reign as Tsar turned into a series of humiliating blunders, Catherine, already an empress in everything but name, seized her moment. She didn't just take power, she grabbed it. And when Peter was deposed in a coup, with Catherine's help of course, she ascended to the throne as one of Russia's most famous monarchs. Now, Catherine wasn't your typical royal. She took lovers, many lovers in fact. From military officers to poets to possibly a furniture maker, she had an eye for power and a knack for rewarding her lovers handsomely. Land, estates, titles. You impress Catherine, you got a sweet deal. Failed to impress her though? Exile was always an option. But it wasn't just about bedroom antics. Catherine ruled with a calculated hand, reforming the Russian Empire in ways that would shape its future for centuries. She expanded its borders, promoted education, and fostered the arts. She was tough, pragmatic, and fully in control, traits that didn't sit well with everyone. And then came the rumors, the ones about her love life. The one involving the horse is the most famous, but there were plenty of others. People whispered about her having secret lovers, manipulative power plays, and affairs of state that no one could fully understand. The real scandal, however, was that she was a woman who ruled an empire without a man by her side. In a time when women in power were seen as anomalies, Catherine was a living contradiction. She wasn't just a powerful woman, she was a threat to the patriarchal structure of the time. She ruled for over 3 decades, crushing rebellions, making bold reforms, and commanding respect on the world stage. And yet, despite all her accomplishments, it wasn't the political reforms or the military victories that people remembered. It was the myths, the rumors of her scandalous affairs, and the one about the horse that, no matter how ridiculous, refused to die. Catherine the Great may not have slept with a horse, but she sure knew how to ride history like she owned it. Her legacy is one of power, passion, and the ever-present gossip machine that worked overtime to try and bring her down. And in the end, the rumor about the horse doesn't matter, because Catherine was already too legendary to be overshadowed by any scandal. She had the last laugh. Fredegund of Neustria wasn't just a queen. She was the very definition of power, wrapped in a ruthless, ironclad will. Born a servant, Fredegund rose through the ranks of the Frankish court with a blend of calculated charm and a body count that would make any political strategist uneasy. If you thought royal intrigue was just about power plays and alliances, Fredegund would prove you wrong. For her, it was about getting what she wanted and leaving anyone who got in her way with a dagger in their back. Fredegund caught the eye of King Chilperic II of Neustria, who already had a wife. But Fredegund, as ambitious as she was beautiful, had no interest in sharing her throne. His first queen died mysteriously after Fredegund entered the picture. Some might call it coincidence, others would call it something much darker. Chilperic didn't waste time. He married Fredegund, and that's when the chaos really began. Once Fredegund was firmly ensconced as the queen, she didn't sit back and let her husband rule. Oh no, she took charge. With a knife under her pillow and a list of political rivals growing by the day, she was known for handling diplomacy the old-fashioned way, by eliminating anyone who stood in her way. Poisoned rivals? Check. Disappearing bishops who didn't know when to keep quiet? Check. Fredegund was more feared than revered, and for good reason. She didn't just rule Neustria, she ruled it with a cold, calculating hand that made people quake in their boots. Her most legendary feud was with her sister-in-law, Brunhilde of Austrasia. The two women waged a battle that could only be described as a royal mean girl war, but with far more bloodshed. Fredegund didn't just try to outwit Brunhilde. She went straight for the jugular. Once, she even hired a killer to murder Brunhilde's son during Mass. Subtlety? Not Fredegund's strong suit, but she was effective. Even after her husband's very suspicious assassination, Fredegund was undeterred. She ruled as regent for her young son, Clothar Setun, continuing her political maneuvers and plotting her next move. Despite her blood-stained path to power, Fredegund maintained control over Neustria. She crushed rebellions, forged alliances, and probably stabbed at least one more person during a dinner party, just to remind everyone who was in charge. But here's the kicker. Fredegund, who had caused so much bloodshed and left so many enemies in her wake, died peacefully in bed. Yes, peacefully. Which honestly feels like a clerical error in the grand script of her life. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe, just maybe, Fredegund had made so many people fear her that the universe decided she had earned a peaceful exit. Fredegund wasn't just a queen. She was the knife in the dark, sharp, cold, and always ready. In a world of royal scheming and political power games, she stood out as one of the few who played by her own rules and didn't hesitate to make her enemies disappear when they got too close. Anne Boleyn wasn't born to be queen, but she was born to be noticed. Smart, stylish, and with a magnetic presence, Anne had that certain something that made people take notice in a room full of powdered men who thought Latin was a surefire way to impress women. She wasn't conventionally beautiful by the standards of the time, but she had something far more powerful. She was sharp-tongued, confident, and had the kind of intellect that left most men feeling a little inadequate. Anne made her entrance at the English court in the early 1500s, and it didn't take long for her to catch the eye of King Henry VIII. At that time, Henry was already married to Catherine of Aragon, but that didn't stop him from pursuing Anne with the kind of passion and obsession usually reserved for teenagers. He sent her love letters, broke from the Catholic Church, and even went so far as to create the Church of England just to marry her. Talk about going all in. Forget roses and sweet nothings. Henry tore apart the very fabric of English society for her. And it worked. Anne became his second wife, and the nation watched as she ascended to the throne. But once Anne had the crown, she wasn't about to sit quietly and play the role of obedient queen. No, Anne was more than just Henry's trophy wife. She was a queen who knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Sharp, opinionated, and fiercely intelligent, Anne often found herself at odds with the rest of the court. She wasn't afraid to challenge Henry either, especially when it came to his increasing fixation on having a male heir. But there was a problem. Anne didn't provide Henry with that much wanted male heir. She gave him one daughter, Elizabeth, who would later go on to rule England like a boss. But in the 1500s, a daughter wasn't going to cut it. And as Anne's flirtatious charm began to wear thin, the rumors started. Affairs with courtiers, incest with her brother, witchcraft, adultery. Everything was blamed on Anne, true or not. The whispers grew louder, and the king, ever fickle, began to grow tired of her. In the cruelest twist of fate, Anne's marriage to Henry fell apart, and the very man who had once broken the world to be with her was now determined to get rid of her. She was arrested, accused of treason, adultery, and even incest, charges that were laughable at best. But Henry was done, and the court was eager to see Anne fall. The trial was a farce, and before she knew it, Anne was sentenced to death. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by beheading. The French swordsman who performed the execution was specially imported for the occasion, because if you're going to kill your wife, you might as well do it with a little class, right? Anne Boleyn's legacy isn't just in her tragic end. It's in the fact that she played the long game and won the throne, only to lose everything because she dared to challenge Henry's obsession with male heirs. She was a queen who lived by her own rules, and though she lost her head, her legacy lived on through her daughter, Elizabeth I, who would become one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Anne Boleyn may have lost her life, but she forever changed the course of English history. She wasn't just a queen. She was the woman who defied a king and gave birth to a legend. And even though her life ended in tragedy, her story continues to fascinate because Anne, for all her faults, was never just a wife or a queen. She was a force to be reckoned with. Christina of Denmark wasn't your typical royal princess. She didn't sit around waiting for a prince to sweep her off her feet. Instead, she managed to avoid becoming just another pawn in a game of marriage politics by doing something so unexpected that it left everyone stunned. When Henry VIII, the King of England, sought her hand in marriage, he didn't get the answer he expected. He got a savage roast instead. Born into Danish royalty in 1521, Christina's life seemed destined to follow the typical royal path: marriage, alliances, and the usual royal duties. But when her husband, the Duke of Milan, passed away shortly after their marriage, Christina found herself a widow at the tender age of 16. Now, this would be a dream come true for many women in her position. She had wealth, independence, and no one to answer to. And that's when Henry VIII, fresh off his messy divorce with Catherine of Aragon and his break from the Catholic Church, decided Christina would be the perfect match for him. But he didn't count on one thing. Christina was not the type of woman to be easily controlled. Instead of giving in to the idea of becoming Henry's third wife, Christina had the perfect response. When one of Henry's emissaries arrived with a portrait of the king and a marriage proposal, Christina famously replied, "If I had two heads, I would happily put one at the disposal of the King of England." Ouch. Talk about a diplomatic burn. The king, who was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted with his power and charm, was not pleased with her refusal, but he continued his pursuit, sending more emissaries and even more lavish gifts to try to convince her. Christina, however, remained firm in her refusal, and her reason? She enjoyed breathing. Smart woman. And so, Henry VIII was forced to turn his attention elsewhere, continuing his search for a bride who could provide him with a male heir. Meanwhile, Christina was perfectly content, living her life in peace, far away from the tumult of English politics. But Christina wasn't done making an impact. After rejecting Henry, she married a much safer option, a duke who didn't behead people for sport. She lived comfortably, ruled wisely, and continued to make a name for herself in Europe. She was a woman of great influence, especially when it came to her role as a regent for her young son. Yet, it's her ability to dodge royal marriage proposals and keep her neck intact that remains one of the most legendary aspects of her life. What made Christina truly remarkable was that she knew the power of saying no. In a time when women were expected to marry for duty, Christina rejected a king, not for fear of power, but for the sheer desire to live life on her own terms. Her refusal to marry Henry VIII not only solidified her legacy as a woman who chose her own path, but also left behind one of the sharpest, most memorable one-liners in history. Christina of Denmark may have never ruled England, but she ruled her own destiny, and that's a legacy worth celebrating. Maria of Portugal's life was like a royal drama wrapped in a bundle of bitterness, love, and scandal. Born into the Portuguese royal family, Maria was expected to play the role of the dutiful wife and mother. However, her marriage to King Alfonso XI of Castile turned out to be a long, painful struggle. Her husband, though a king, wasn't exactly a romantic hero. Alfonso was a man with a massive ego and an eye for women who weren't his wife. Maria's life, at first glance, seemed like the epitome of royal duty, but it was anything but peaceful. Maria's marriage to Alfonso was more of a political alliance than a love story, and it didn't take long for her to realize just how unfaithful her husband really was. Alfonso openly flaunted his mistress, Leonor de Guzman, a woman who seemed to have more of his affection than Maria ever could. As any woman in her situation might, Maria felt the sting of betrayal. Her once promising marriage began to crumble as Alfonso lavished attention and affection on his lover, while Maria quietly stewed in the background. But Maria wasn't just going to sit there and play the part of the wronged wife. She had something far more powerful than mere beauty. She had a deep, burning desire for revenge. Her bitterness grew over the years as she watched Leonor take over the throne, enjoying the benefits of Maria's own marriage. And then, after Alfonso's death, Maria's moment of triumph finally arrived. She returned to Portugal with her son Peter, and the stage was set for a drama like no other. Maria, now a mother determined to protect her son's future, found herself in the middle of yet another scandal. Peter, her son, fell in love with a woman named Inés de Castro, a woman of lower nobility, and they became secretly married. Maria, how ye ver, didn't approve. Some say it was because Inés wasn't of the right rank, but others say it was because Maria wasn't ready to share her son with anyone, even a future queen. What happened next is the stuff of legends. The drama escalated when Inés was assassinated, allegedly under Maria's encouragement. Yes, you read that right. Maria might have been behind the murder of her son's beloved. Whether she masterminded the assassination or simply allowed it to happen is up for debate. But what happened afterward is clear. Peter was devastated. In a shocking, almost theatrical act of revenge, Peter, after the murder of Inés, declared that she was his wife and had been wronged. He even went as far as to exhume her body and crown her as queen. Imagine that, a dead woman crowned as royalty. Peter paraded Inés's body around, forcing the nobles to kiss her rotting hand as an act of loyalty. If this was a move designed to shock everyone, it certainly worked. Maria of Portugal may have sought to control her son's future, but in the end, she lost the battle for his heart. She never truly got the love she wanted, and her legacy is marked by her involvement in a political and personal drama that had the whole court talking for years. But it wasn't just about the politics of her time. It was the way she held on to her bitterness and tried to control everyone around her, even at the cost of her own peace. Her reign, though not defined by her own rule, left behind a trail of intrigue, scandal, and whispers in the halls of her court. Maria of Portugal was a queen who never fully relinquished control, and the tragic tale of Inés de Castro proves just how far she would go to protect her legacy, even if it meant going to extreme lengths. Olga of Kiev wasn't a queen who played by the usual royal rules. In fact, she threw the rulebook out the window and created her own terrifyingly efficient brand of vengeance. When her husband, Prince Igor, was murdered by a neighboring tribe, the Drevlians, they made the critical mistake of underestimating her. They thought she would mourn and quickly move on, accepting their proposal to marry their prince. But Olga had other plans that involved revenge so brutal it would make even the most hardened warrior shudder. Instead of quietly accepting their offer, Olga put on a calm and collected front. She smiled, nodded, and promised to consider it. Then, she did something absolutely horrifying. She invited the Drevian envoys to her court, and once they arrived, she had them thrown into a pit and buried alive. The Drevlians may have thought they were dealing with a grieving widow, but they quickly learned that Olga was far from helpless. This was only the beginning of her ruthless revenge. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate that had befallen their men, sent more suitors. Olga, always a step ahead, invited them to a bathhouse to freshen up before their meeting. Once inside, she locked the doors and set the building on fire, killing all of them. It was cold, calculated, and utterly devastating. But Olga wasn't done yet. She then marched to the Drevian capital, where she asked for a funeral feast in honor of her late husband. The Drevlians, drunk on their own arrogance, agreed, not knowing that they were about to become the victims of Olga's greatest act of vengeance. Once they were drunk and vulnerable, Olga's soldiers struck, killing around 5,000 of them. It wasn't just a feast, it was a massacre, a warning to anyone who dared to cross her. But Olga wasn't finished with the Drevlians. She had one more twist up her sleeve. When the Drevlians begged for mercy, she agreed. On one condition: each household had to give her 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. It seemed like a reasonable request, but in true Olga fashion, she had a more sinister plan in mind. She tied sulfur-soaked cloth to the birds' legs, set them on fire, and released them. The birds flew back to their homes, starting a series of fires that consumed the Drevian city in a coordinated fiery assault. It was a calculated act of destruction, and the Drevlians were left in ruins. Olga's revenge was both brutal and brilliant. She didn't just avenge her husband's death, she sent a message that resonated across the land. She was not a woman to be trifled with, and anyone who underestimated her did so at their own peril. Eventually, Olga converted to Christianity and became a canonized saint, proving that even the most ruthless avenger can find a path to redemption, or at least to the saint's altar. Olga's story is one of pure, unyielding power. She didn't rely on armies, politics, or diplomacy. She relied on her cunning, her ruthlessness, and an unshakable will to get what she wanted. She didn't just take revenge, she turned it into an art form, and in the end, she became both a symbol of vengeance and a saint, reminding us that even the most savage rulers can leave a lasting legacy. Lucretia Borgia may not have been born a queen, but she ruled a kingdom of scandal, intrigue, and betrayal with a grace and ferocity that most royalty would envy. Born in 1480 into one of Italy's most notorious families, the Borgia dynasty, Lucretia had everything she could ever want, except for peace. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, made sure the Borgia name was etched in history, but not for reasons anyone would hope for. The Borgias were infamous for their web of political power, corruption, and absolutely scandalous affairs, and Lucretia was right in the center of it all. From the moment Lucretia came of age, she became a pawn in the family's game of power. She was married off to powerful men to cement political alliances, and each marriage seemed to end with tragedy, mystery, and whispers of foul play. But her life was far more than the sum of her marriages. It was the rumors, the deadly intrigues, and her ability to navigate the Borgia world of chaos that defined her. The rumors about Lucretia were wild. Some suggested that she was involved in the poisonings that claimed the lives of several of her relatives. Others whispered about an affair with her own brother, Cesare Borgia. These rumors were exaggerated, and in some cases entirely untrue. But that didn't stop them from becoming the stuff of legend. In the world of the Borgias, everyone had a motive, and anyone could be a suspect. Whether or not she was a direct participant in the family's murders is still up for debate. But the fact remains, Lucretia was at the center of one of the most scandalous families in history. Her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza was politically motivated, but the marriage was never consummated, and Giovanni was soon pushed into annulment by her powerful father. Then came her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, a man who would eventually be murdered under mysterious circumstances. Some say it was Cesare, her brother, who ordered his death, possibly because Alfonso stood in the way of his own ambitions. But once again, the shadow of the Borgia family loomed large, and Lucretia was forced to move on. Despite the rumors and the tumultuous nature of her personal life, Lucretia wasn't just some hapless pawn. She was a skilled political operator. After her father's death, she took control of her own life and used her intelligence and influence to maintain her power. She was no longer the pawn, she was the player. Lucretia became a respected patron of the arts, amras, and her court in Ferrara became a center of cultural and intellectual activity. She proved that there was more to her than just her notorious family name. But even as she flourished, the scandalous rumors about her never fully died down. The whispers of her supposed affairs, her role in the Borgias' many crimes, and her notorious family legacy followed her to her grave. Was she a victim of her family's dark ambitions? Or was she a willing participant in their Machiavellian schemes? It's hard to say. What we do know is that Lucretia Borgia became the ultimate symbol of ambiguity, her life an intricate blend of power, scandal, and mystery. In the end, Lucretia's true legacy is one of complexity. Was she a poisoner, a seductress, or simply a woman trying to survive in a world where power was everything? The truth is probably a mix of all of the above. She may have lost her family's name to infamy, but Lucretia Borgia's story is one of survival, manipulation, and undeniable influence. The Borgias may have been infamous, but it was Lucretia who would leave a lasting mark on history, her legacy as both a tragic figure and a powerful player in the world of Italian politics. And so, the lives of these medieval queens and princesses reveal a powerful truth. History has always had a way of celebrating those who defied expectations. From Joanna of Naples, who ruled with a bold flair for the dramatic, to the fierce Olga of Kiev, who turned vengeance into an art form, these women weren't just figures in the background of history. They were the headline makers, the ones who shaped their worlds with power, wit, and sometimes sheer audacity. While some of these queens and women ruled with ambition, others were defined by scandal. Figures like Anne Boleyn, who played the game of love and politics with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, or Lucretia Borgia, who became a legend for her family, his intrigues. These women were as much about mystery as they were about power. They each played roles, some by choice and others by force, in the drama of their time. But beyond the whispers and rumors, one thing remains clear. These queens, whether they were feared or adored, loved or betrayed, left indelible marks on the history books. They are remembered not just for the crowns they wore, but for the stories they left behind. Stories of love, loss, betrayal, revenge, and above all, the relentless fight for survival in a world dominated by men. Their legacies are a reminder that sometimes the real power isn't about who wears the crown. It's about who dares to challenge it, who dares to rewrite the rules, and who dares to leave their own mark on the pages of history. These women didn't just live in the shadow of power. They carved out their own places in the sun, and we still can't stop talking about them. So, what can we learn from their lives? Perhaps that we all have the power to defy expectations, to fight for what we believe in, and to leave behind a legacy that will last long after we're gone. The medieval queens didn't just rule, they made their mark, and their stories will echo through the ages, forever fascinating us with their audacity, their power, and their resilience.